Hello. On May 26, 2014, Sydney, Australia, was in the middle of autumn, and the morning along the coast was slightly chilly. Although it was a Monday, 24-year-old Sydney resident Lachlan Stevens didn't have to work that day. He and his friends were boating from Sydney Harbour to the other side of the bay. Around 7:30 a.m., as their boat neared the bay, Lachlan noticed a long blue tarpaulin floating on the water not far away. Out of curiosity, he turned the boat and slowly approached the strange object. Upon getting closer, he saw that the tarp was tightly bound with white rope, and there appeared to be a long object wrapped inside. Looking more carefully, Lachlan was startled to see a pair of white sneakers sticking out from the bottom of the blue tarp. It was clear that someone was wrapped inside. Overwhelmed with panic, Lachlan immediately called the police, took some photos, and waited for law enforcement to arrive. When the police arrived at the scene, they opened the tarp and discovered the body of a young man inside. He was neatly dressed, wearing a black shirt and long pants, with a plastic glove on his right hand and white sneakers on his feet. Upon performing an autopsy, the forensic pathologist determined that the young man had been shot twice in the right chest, which was the cause of death. The victim had several tattoos on his back, which allowed police to quickly identify him as Jaime Gao, a young man who had been missing for a week. Jaime Gao, 20, was a business student at the University of Technology Sydney and lived in Hustville, a Chinese neighborhood often referred to as Little Hong Kong due to its many Chinese supermarkets and shops. Jaime was not only a good student but also had a stylish appearance, dressing well and being well-liked by his friends. Before his murder, he had been dating a Japanese girlfriend for a few months. To most people, Jaime appeared to be a regular student who attended classes on time and often socialized with friends. However, few knew the truth. The seemingly refined 20-year-old was actually a member of the Hong Kong triads. Jaime Gao was no stranger to the police. In fact, authorities had been tracking him since 2011 for smuggling and distributing illegal substances. At just 17 years old, he had already used his status as a student to facilitate trafficking and distribution for the triads. By 2014, at the age of 20, he had become a key figure in the gang's operations in Sydney. Jaime's friends noticed that in May 2014, he frequently boasted about a big deal he was about to make, claiming it would bring him a substantial profit. He had been preparing for this transaction for a while and was eagerly waiting for the appointed day. The meeting was scheduled for Tuesday, May 20th, 2014. That afternoon, Jaime drove his white car to Padstow, a southern suburb of Sydney, accompanied by two friends. Before stepping out of the vehicle, Jaime left his phone and wallet behind, grabbed a bag, and walked toward another car captured on CCTV footage. His two friends remained in the car, waiting for him. However, as time passed, Jaime never returned, causing his friends to grow increasingly anxious. They drove around the area multiple times but couldn't find any trace of him. Sensing something was wrong, they decided to park and contacted several friends and Jaime's family members, including Henry. Henry had known Jaime since high school, and they had always been close. Around 3 p.m., Henry received a message informing him that Jaime was missing. After gathering with a few other friends, they all went to Padstow to look for Jaime's car, as described by his two friends. When they opened the car door, they found Jaime's phone, passport, and some documents untouched, but the phone appeared to have been tampered with. Most of its files and images had been deleted. Despite extensive searching, Jaime was nowhere to be found. The following day, on May 21st, the group of friends decided they could not wait any longer and went to the police station to report Jaime missing. Henry informed the police that the previous evening, he had dinner with Jaime, who had been excitedly talking about a major upcoming transaction at the Meridian Hotel in Hustville. Jaime had mentioned that the deal was with a former police investigator, but he did not disclose the name. As previously mentioned, Jaime was not unknown to the police. They had long been aware of his involvement in drug trafficking but had never gathered enough evidence to arrest him. In fact, Australia's Crime Commission, ACC, had secretly investigated Jaime for weeks before his disappearance. On January 9, 2014, 4 months before Jaime went missing, ACC agents brought him in for questioning at their Sydney headquarters. The official reason given was that Jaime and two accomplices had kidnapped a 19-year-old, known only as Y. This young man was the roommate of someone named Alex, who had broken up with his girlfriend. The ex-girlfriend happened to know Jaime, and in a fit of rage, Alex had allegedly asked Jaime to teach him a lesson. At around 10 p.m. that night, Jaime and two others showed up at Alex's apartment, but since Alex wasn't home, they instead kidnapped his roommate, Y, assuming he was an accomplice. They later dumped Y in a park and assaulted him. Following the incident, all involved were charged with kidnapping. However, the question remained, why was ACC so interested in such an insignificant case? Many suspected that the ACC wasn't just investigating the kidnapping, but was actually trying to gather intelligence on the triads, possibly to intimidate Jaime or even recruit him as an informant. When questioned about these allegations, the ACC denied any ulterior motives. Returning to Jaime's case, police quickly gathered crucial leads by reviewing CCTV footage from the area. On the afternoon of the incident, after stepping out of his car, Jaime walked towards a white vehicle across the street. Security cameras recorded him entering the back seat of the car. The timestamp on the footage was inaccurate. The actual time of the event was 1:40 p.m., not 5:12 p.m. The car then started moving and traveled approximately 900 meters, eventually turning into a storage facility. At 1:42 p.m., a hooded man wearing a cap was seen getting out of the driver's seat of the white car. Upon further investigation, police discovered that on the previous night, April 19th, at 7:51 p.m., this same man had entered the Meridian Hotel in Hustville. The person he met there was the same man seen in the footage from the following day. Police believed this meeting was to finalize details of the drug deal. Upon thorough examination, authorities were shocked to identify the hooded man as none other than a former acquaintance, Glenn McNamara, a retired detective from the Sydney Police Department. At this time, McNamara had retired and transitioned into a private detective and writer. He had written a book titled Dirty Work and had appeared on numerous television programs, gaining some public recognition. However, in reality, McNamara was in the midst of an expensive divorce, and the legal battle had nearly bankrupted him. His new book was selling for 38.5 Australian dollars, but sales were disappointing. In desperation, he decided to take a reckless risk. Both McNamara and Jaime Gao worked with the same lawyer, with Jaime primarily serving as a Cantonese English interpreter. After entering the security code to open the warehouse door, McNamara slowly drove to Unit 803, got out and opened the rear door. Jaime quickly ran inside, clearly wanting to avoid being caught on camera. A few minutes later, at 1:45 p.m., a silver car arrived. It circled the warehouse area to ensure that no one else was around. Once certain, the car parked across from the warehouse door, and an older man with a limp stepped out. He approached warehouse 803, knocked on the door, and entered. Minutes later, the older man returned to his car, repositioning his trunk closer to the white car's trunk. Shortly after, someone emerged from the warehouse, now wearing different clothes, carrying a surfboard bag. At this point, the bag appeared very light. Not long after, McNamara dragged out another much heavier bag. Exiting the warehouse, the two men worked together to load the heavier bag into the trunk of the car. Once everything was in place, the car left the area, and from that moment on, Jaime Gao was never seen again. Police examined the 2 gunshot wounds on Jaime's body and determined that he had been murdered inside the warehouse before being stuffed into the surfboard bag. Authorities reviewed CCTV footage from the surrounding area and soon discovered more crucial clues. On the afternoon of the incident, at 3:03 p.m., McNamara was recorded returning to the parking lot of his apartment building. The surveillance cameras clearly captured his car's license plate. Further investigation revealed that McNamara had purchased the vehicle under a fake name just months earlier for 2,000 Australian dollars. About an hour later, at 4:20 p.m., McNamara returned to the storage facility with the older man. The two appeared relaxed, laughing and chatting. Inside the store, McNamara rented a set of ropes, and then both men proceeded to the underground parking lot, where they loaded the surfboard bag containing Jaime's body onto McNamara's small boat. After completing the disposal, they bought 6 bottles of beer to celebrate. The most shocking detail? The police didn't even need to investigate the identity of the second man. They immediately recognized him as Rogerson, a notorious former detective with a long history of corruption and crime. Roger was born on January 3, 1941, in Sydney, Australia. When he was 6 years old, his family moved to the suburbs. He grew up in an ordinary working-class family. His father was a boilermaker, and his mother was a housewife who stayed home to care for their children. Roger was an intelligent child, excelled in school, and had dreamed of becoming a police officer since high school. However, his mother disapproved, hoping he would become an engineer instead. Meanwhile, his father strongly opposed his career choice, questioning why his son wanted to join the police force, considering that it was both dangerous and poorly paid. At that time, Australia was plagued by crime, and law enforcement was engaged in brutal battles against organized crime syndicates. Despite his family's objections, Roger was determined to pursue his dream. In January 1958, at the age of 17, he enrolled in the police academy. After 2 years of training, at just 19 years old, he officially became a police officer in the New South Wales Police Force, assigned to Bankstown Police Station, a poverty-stricken area with a high crime rate and a large population of Middle Eastern refugees. Growing up in Bankstown, Roger was intimately familiar with the local streets and had many connections. He knew exactly who the drug dealers were and who frequently broke the law. As a result, he often provided exclusive intelligence to detectives, earning their trust. After a few years, he was promoted to investigator. Over the next several decades, Roger participated in numerous armed police operations, cracking down hard on criminal activities. During this era of social unrest, Roger repeatedly confronted criminals head-on, solving many major cases and becoming a public hero. Many believed that, with his outstanding record, Roger was destined to become the next chief of police. However, reality was far from the perfect image he projected. Beneath the mask of justice, Roger was secretly controlling many of Australia's illegal underworld transactions. Notorious crime bosses and leaders of criminal organizations had become his trusted allies. Anyone who stood in his way would inevitably meet a grim fate. In 1981, a drug dealer named Warren Lanfranchi was shot dead by Roger in broad daylight after stealing 10,000 Australian dollars from him. Roger claimed he had acted in self-defense as a police officer. Despite being prosecuted, the jury ultimately acquitted him due to insufficient evidence. On July 5, 1981, Roger's girlfriend gave an explosive interview to the media. When questioned by reporters, she exposed Roger's secrets and criminal activities. Although her testimony provided crucial evidence, in the subsequent trial, Roger was once again found not guilty. He was only given a minor punishment for obstructing justice, serving 9 months in prison. 3 years later, in 1984, undercover police officer Michael Drury was shot twice inside his home by an assassin. Miraculously, he survived. After an investigation, authorities suspected that the attack was carried out by hitman Christopher Dale Flannery, allegedly on Roger's orders. A year later, in 1985, Christopher mysteriously disappeared, and police suspected that Roger had ordered his murder. A year later, in 1986, Christopher's body was found floating in a pond in Sydney. Forensic experts determined that he had been brutally murdered. However, as a highly experienced detective, Roger was well aware of police investigation techniques. Ultimately, due to a lack of concrete evidence, the jury once again acquitted him. On April 11, 1986, Roger was officially dismissed from the Sydney Police Force. Losing his title as a detective, Roger immediately found himself without a stable income. However, with his sharp intellect, he quickly discovered new ways to make money. He started frequently appearing on media interviews, recounting his past experiences in law enforcement. In 2006, he even launched a stand-up comedy show titled The Brutal World. After 2 years on the comedy circuit in 2008, Roger began writing crime columns for the Daily Mail. The following year, in 2009, he published a novel based on his own life experiences. Although he earned a significant amount of money, Roger was constantly embroiled in lawsuits. Despite maintaining an extravagant public image, his financial situation remained precarious after paying legal fees. It was clear that Roger was a master manipulator, constantly adapting to exploit new opportunities. His ultimate motivation is for money. In the early morning of the following day, at 7:32 a.m., the elevator camera in McNamara's apartment building captured footage of him and Roger. The two were carrying fishing rods, seemingly preparing for a trip out to sea. A few minutes later, a parking lot camera recorded McNamara driving his blue car, towing his boat out of the parking area. On the boat, there was a large blue tarp. 3 hours later, at 11:03 a.m., McNamara returned to the harbor. By that time, the blue tarp had disappeared. After disposing of Jaime's body, the two men drove back to storage unit 803. Now, their next task was to clean up the crime scene. Inside the warehouse, Roger, who was 72 years old, appeared to struggle with movement. He was seen carrying a small bucket and pouring liquid into the drain. After finishing their cleanup, Roger and McNamara called a few friends and went to a bar to celebrate, as if murder was just another day's work for them. On Friday, May 23, 2014, Jaime had been missing for 4 days. As usual, McNamara parked his car in the basement of his apartment complex. At 9:43 p.m., he checked his mailbox, then slowly returned to his apartment to sleep, completely unaware that police were tracking his every move through security cameras. For hours later, as McNamara slept, the police made their move. Inside the small, cluttered warehouse, investigators found evidence that Jaime had been shot while sitting in a chair. After spending hours gathering evidence, police left storage unit 803. At 4:30 a.m., they secretly towed away McNamara's white car. What they found inside shocked them. Aside from a brown bag under the driver's seat, officers also discovered a blue backpack under the back seat, which contained 2 bags of illegal substances. The total weight of the drugs was 2.78 kilograms, with a market value of 700,000 Australian dollars. If sold to retail buyers, it could fetch up to 3 million Australian dollars. Police concluded that these drugs were the true motive behind Jaime's murder. The investigation tightens. At daybreak, McNamara realized something was seriously wrong. He went downstairs and found that his car was missing. Alarmed, he immediately called Roger. At that moment, Roger was at the airport, not attempting to flee, but attending a fundraising event. Upon learning Roger's whereabouts, McNamara rushed to meet him. After discussing their strategy, Roger flew to Brisbane, while McNamara was arrested by police at 6:20 p.m. An hour later, at 7:27 p.m., a large police force arrived at Roger's house in Western Sydney. Shortly afterward, a press conference was held, announcing that Rogerson was now a suspect in Jaime Gao's murder. Upon searching Roger's home, police found a pair of black pants, which were strikingly similar to those Jaime Gao had worn on the day of the incident. After testing the pants, they found traces of gunpowder residue. After an hour and a half of searching, at 9 p.m., police discovered a small bag in Roger's garage, which they believed belonged to Jaime. On the morning of May 26th, 2 detectives flew from Sydney to Brisbane to arrest Roger. Around the same time, Sydney police discovered Jaime's body floating in the sea. Meanwhile, Roger had already left Brisbane and was driving back to Sydney. By the morning of May 27th, Roger was immediately surrounded by reporters. The interrogations. Once the 2 suspects were in custody, police began their interrogations. Interestingly, the 2 men, who had been celebrating together just days earlier, suddenly turned on each other, each blaming the other for pulling the trigger. Roger claimed that he received a call from McNamara, who asked him to come to the warehouse. When he arrived, he was shocked to find Jaime lying unconscious on the floor. However, McNamara denied this story. According to McNamara, the shooter was Roger. He said that while the 2 were talking with Jaime, Roger suddenly pulled out a gun and shot him. McNamara even claimed that Roger had pointed the gun at him, warning that if he didn't cooperate, he would be next. Out of fear for his life, McNamara had no choice but to comply. Was either of them telling the truth? Investigators quickly found new evidence. By reviewing security camera footage, police discovered that McNamara and Jaime had met more than 20 times before the murder. Jaime had fully trusted McNamara, believing him to be a retired detective offering him a major business deal. However, McNamara had meticulously planned the murder. Nearly a full day before the crime, at 10 a.m. on May 19th, McNamara towed his boat back to the apartment's parking lot. The next morning, just 2 hours before the murder, he walked to a public payphone on a shopping street and called Jaime, setting up their meeting later that day. At 1 p.m., Jaime and his two friends arrived at the meeting location. Unbeknownst to Jaime, the silver car parked across the street belonged to Roger. As Jaime approached McNamara, Roger started his car and drove away. At Storage Unit 803, the three men met, but only two walked out alive. The final verdict. Although Roger insisted that McNamara was the shooter, forensic evidence contradicted his claims. Police found gunpowder residue on Roger's clothing, leading them to believe that Roger had fired the gun. Authorities theorized that because McNamara had never killed anyone before, while Roger had a history of involvement in multiple murder cases, the shooter was likely Roger. Supporting this theory, Roger was seen removing a bag from his car after Jaime was shot, indicating he had premeditated the murder. Even though McNamara was the one driving the white car, police traced evidence linking Roger to the vehicle's purchase. In the end, it appeared that both men had jointly planned the crime, intending to steal Jaime's supply of drugs. Police believe Jaime was murdered because he violated an unwritten rule of black market deals. Under standard underground trade procedures, the buyer must present 700,000 Australian dollars in cash before receiving the goods. However, Jaime's eagerness and carelessness led him into a deadly trap. Some speculate that this entire deal was a setup. It's possible that criminal gangs had conspired with these two corrupt officers. Given that Jaime had previously been investigated by the Crime Commission for his involvement in a kidnapping case, the gangs may have suspected that Jaime had become a police informant. With overwhelming evidence, the jury convicted both Roger Rogerson and Glenn McNamara of the murder of Jaime Gao. Roger remained silent as his life sentence was handed down, while McNamara patted his chest and muttered, "Stay strong." 3 months later, in September 2016, both former officers were sentenced to life in prison without parole. Since then, both men have repeatedly appealed their convictions, but all appeals have been rejected. The most recent appeal was filed by McNamara on May 16, 2023, but no changes have been made. Roger is now 82 years old, and it seems he has given up on appealing his sentence. Given the complexity of this case, even if his appeal were successful, who knows how long it would take for a ruling. By then, Roger might already be reunited with Jaime.